Good morning. How are you?
Good, thank you. How are you going?
I am good. I have carefully chosen a nondescript tie today because we're so close to the general election. Can we mention the general election? Oh no, don't mention the general election.
Yeah.
So I've gone for grey because it's so dull and boring. I can't imagine there's any political party that has grey as their colour. So
Yeah.
here I am in grey.
Yeah. It's been an interesting one for me because I voted in the New Zealand election last year, was when we had ours, and now I'm here and able to vote in this election. So I kind of feel a little bit like I've cheated the system somehow to get to have 2 votes in 2 years. So
You're just a global phenomenon, aren't you? So
just jet setting around.
Yeah. It's just you bestride the world like a colossus. Quoting.
I just need to get into Monaco. Although Monaco just was grey listed as high risk for money laundering, right? They were just imposed on the what's the list called? Sorry, David, the red.
The FATF list, is that right? Financial Action Task Force. Yeah. I think that's because they have dodgy Grand Prix and things, with potholes and overtaking on bends. They actually have, of course, the Grand Prix through the streets, which is
That's cool, isn't it?
crazy, isn't it? Yeah.
I found that fascinating when I saw that, because obviously there's lots of rules about having your money in Monaco. Like you have to be a resident of Monaco. So I thought that was quite fascinating that then happened. But I suppose with the volume of money that goes through that city and country, that does apply. That does make sense. I think we're on the 4th AMA. This is our 4th month together.
Oh, right.
I think so. It's gone by fast.
Yeah, we're getting to be old hands at this, aren't we? Yeah.
We've got a bit of a routine now. So we have something a little bit different today, and quite delicate. So I'm trying to find the right words to say. But obviously, we have the election on Thursday. And with that election, there's party policies that have come out on AML compliance and the different party policies on what they would do if they were to become into power, and what they would apply and change with AML regulations. David and I have, behind the scenes, prepared something to discuss in regards to what this may look like. But I wanted to put it to viewers to see whether or not they felt, one, comfortable about us discussing it, or if we just keep to the usual, question and answer session. But I thought, this is all, Navigating AML is meant to be a way for you to keep up to date with what might be coming through, keep your finger on the pulse. So I thought this maybe is an opportunity there, but David and I are very careful and we will present anything impartially. So I'll just put through
a quick poll or something on,
a quick poll. So
what you have in mind, I think, Sophie, I nearly got your name wrong then.
Did you?
Gosh,
oh no,
nearly called you something else entirely. So
terrible.
What we've got in mind is just to chat about what the different parties are saying, and not to say we prefer this party or that party or whatever, but just in terms of AML, because certainly in terms of the broadcast media, AML is probably not the top topic amongst the political pundits. But Sophie, I know you've done some research, and you actually know a lot more than I do about what the different parties are thinking in terms of AML. But you mentioned Monaco, and Monaco, of course, is not a UK dependency, but there are UK dependent countries in the Caribbean, for example, some of which are famous or infamous for dealing in financial affairs and financial secrecy. And one of the issues is, and I can see the answers to the poll are basically saying, yes, come on, let's have a chat about this. So one of the potential issues is, how far does the Westminster government lean on dependent countries, small countries in the Caribbean or wherever, and say, look, you've got to clean up your act as far as money laundering is concerned, as far as regulation is concerned, as far as transparency is concerned, in terms of who are the beneficial owners of these funds. You know, if you've got a trust set up in, let's say, the Cayman Islands, do you have to disclose where that money's come from, who those funds actually belong to, or do you just have some accountant or lawyer trustee who happens to live in the Cayman Islands saying, I'm the trustee and that's all I'm telling you?
Yeah.
So I think what we are likely to see is if the Labour Party get in, I think they are keener on disclosure of those sort of things. So I think there might be more of a leaning on, and it's a bit delicate constitutionally in terms of you've got a country, say, let's say the Cayman Islands, which has got its own government, its own democracy and so on. Who are we in Westminster to tell them how to do things? But on the other hand, if we finance a lot of their government expenditure, then you know, why are we paying them money to do things that we don't want them to do? So there's kind of a balance there. But I think the Labour Party are likely to be more keen on leaning on some of those countries and saying, look, let's have some more disclosure, let's have some more rules.
I can give just a quick overview. So Labour 100% are very strong in their AML policy, and they have openly criticised government in the past of weak and watered down policy. When it comes to the Conservative Party, they've raised concerns about the use of unincorporated associations to channel opaque donations. Very legal term, I didn't write that. There's one of them, the Libby Dems, the Liberal Democrats, particularly focused on enhancing the powers of the Electoral Commission to better oversee and regulate political donations, which is quite critical in terms of sanctions and Russian money flowing through potentially into political elections. The Green Party, measures against political money laundering. They support the implementation of stricter due diligence process for political donations. And the Scottish National Party, they support aligning with UK AML laws with the UE standards. So most are focused on, would you say, that political money flowing through and funding political campaigns and better identifying where that comes from?
Yeah, I sometimes see accountants, maybe accountants should form their own new party, because I sometimes see accountants saying, look, you know, for 20 years plus now, we have had these pesky money laundering regulations. We have had to listen to people like Sophie telling us that we've got to do stuff that we don't want to do. And what has been the impact in terms of, do we now find there is now no financial crime because of all these wonderful regulations? And if it's not achieving anything, why don't we just sweep them all away and just say, forget it, guys, just do your own thing. It's not making any difference. It's not producing any good to anybody. Surprise, surprise, none of the political parties are saying that at all.
No.
There is just no prospect of any party coming into government unless you create a new one that is going to say, let's scrap the money laundering regulations. Let's not have firm-wide risk assessments and policies, controls and procedures documents because they're just a waste of time.
No.
Nobody's going to say that. So sorry, guys, you're stuck with us.
No, and that's coming through. No one, it's never, from what I've been able to understand, it's not that any party has said we need to do less. There's no one saying we need to do less. It's we need to do more, but how we go about it needs to be better considered in terms of, I was reading one when it comes to banks, like banks recognize that they need to do more when it comes to AML processes, but they also don't want that to impact their customer experience or their client experience, right? If they're then having to double down on identification documents, X, Y, and Z. And we know, I'm not an accountant, but as accountants, that how often that you find a risk and it be a true risk is actually quite low. So there's that balance. Some stats just in terms of the what we're facing, just to remind you. I have some articles to share once we conclude this discussion as well for your own research if you'd like. But up to 40% of the world's dirty money, according to a minister from Labour, still flows through London, UK, overseas territories and dependencies. And there is the amount of money washed through the UK each year could be as much as $88 billion, which is enough to fix some problems if the government was able to get tax on that. But to Labour, and Zubir's just putting our preset questions there. Thank you, Zubir. Labour, strong indication that a sharp legislative gaze will be directed towards money laundering. There was shock from Labour about disinclusion of the money laundering failure to prevent fraud. The Economic Crime and Corporate Transparency Bill introduced the prevention and failure of some things like the abuse of position, false representation, failure to disclose information, failure to prevent money laundering was included but then removed. So they were quite upset about that.
Can I just say a word about that?
Please.
Stop you in mid-flow. But yes, the Economic Crime Bill Act did bring in this failure to prevent fraud offence. And previously, some years ago, we had a failure to prevent bribery offence comes in. And one of the things that was interesting about the failure to prevent fraud offence is that it applies to companies, to businesses, which are classed as large under the Companies Act. And that means, if I've got my figures right, turnover in excess of £36 million, employees in excess of 250, assets in excess of 18 million. So you've got to satisfy two of those three criteria to be large. So the vast majority in terms of numbers of companies are not large. So they don't have to comply with this failure to prevent fraud requirement. And the government at the time pointed to two reasons to restrict this to large companies. One was they said, well, it's an admin burden, and we don't want to burden all the small businesses in the UK with having to prevent fraud and having to bring in new paperwork and so on. And I can imagine a lot of accountants grinding their teeth saying, yeah, well, why didn't you do that with the money laundering regs? But they didn't. And the second reason is a bit more technical, is that if you are trying to prosecute a company for, let's say, committing a fraud, then under English law, what you have to do is to prove in court that what's called the directing mind of the company was engaged in the fraud, if you're charging them with fraud. So if you've got like one man and a dog companies, then it's easy to see who the directing mind is because there's only one person there. So you say, I've been doing a case recently, a fraudulent trading case, where they say, right, this bloke ran the company was fraudulent, he was engaged in it. And he's the directing mind because there's only him there. Fine. But if you're trying to prosecute, let's say, one of the high street banks, then who is the directing mind there? Is it possible, say, that one branch of the bank is operating some sort of fraudulent thing without head office knowing about it? And if that is the case, then under English law, you can't prosecute the bank for that fraud because the directing mind of the bank, whoever that is, wasn't aware of it, wasn't engaged in it. So coming back to the failure to prevent offence, the logic is that those sorts of companies who you ordinarily would have real difficulty in prosecuting for fraud, you can now prosecute for failing to prevent fraud. And so it makes sense to have that apply only to large companies. The counter argument is, well, hey, everybody should be preventing fraud, so every business should be doing it. But that argument, which was put up in Parliament at the time, didn't win the day. Now, whether, I don't know, if we have a change of government, whether that policy might change, who knows? Who knows?
I can say to some of the things that would highly likely be implemented. I may not need to share that in terms of the outrage or the what would you say, shock I've written in my notes that came from Labor in terms of just highlighting their kind of attitude to money laundering, that they do seem to see it as a risk to the financial integrity of the United Kingdom. So a directive in the manifesto from Labor calls for the next government to ensure that all companies and firms should declare the identity of individuals with significant ownership or control over their activities. That's one part. The second part, UK should also impose obligations on Companies House to verify the status of shareholders and stop people hiding from nominee shareholders. David?
Yeah, that is I think there are campaigners who are focused on all the crazy companies that get formed, often by people from outside the UK, using a UK address and perhaps, as it were, squatting on somebody's address, using it falsely, creating a company, putting a registered office there, sometimes even using people's identities and creating them as directors, and they know nothing about it. And the argument is, well, shouldn't Companies House be much stricter about who it registers, which companies it registers in the first place? Because the previous regime, if you like, was, look, if you send us the forms and the 20 quid fee or whatever it is, we'll register your company, no questions asked. And there has been a lot of fakery around, and sometimes you see within half an hour 50 different companies with similar names, obviously created by the same people, but having different registered office addresses and different directors who are probably totally unaware that their names have been used. Yeah. So yeah, Companies House, the argument is Companies House should be doing a lot more to stop those sort of things happening. Sorry, Sophie, I interrupted you.
No. I asked you to. But I was going to say, from the Firmcheck product side, we often have discussions of what is the source of truth, because Companies House is not often the source of truth. And with clients that we have, when we do with Firmcheck have a Companies House integration, we go, you're bringing in all of this information and some of it's actually quite incorrect or not validated. So where do we get this actual information from? And it should be Companies House, it should be the source of truth, but it doesn't seem to be correct some of the time. So it's a little bit of difficulty.
I mean, one of the sometimes overlooked requirements of the money laundering regs, which I think might be regulation 22(3) bracket B bracket Roman numeral 2.
I really remember what I had for breakfast, David. Let alone this obscure legislation.
We'll look this up afterwards and find out it's totally wrong about that. But anyway, but what it says is, when you act for a company as an accountant, for example, you must at least ascertain the full names of all the directors. And that's a question that we might come to later, is what do I have to do? So it doesn't mean you have to ID them all. You don't have to get passports and all that sort of stuff from them all, but you have to ascertain and verify the full names of all directors. And you might think, right, well, I can verify that very easily because I can do a search at Companies House and done it, job done.
Mm-hmm.
But as you say, Sophie, the information at Companies House isn't reliable in that sense. So it's a little bit more difficult than that, sadly.
Should we conclude this
Please,
touchy
yes.
topic
Touchy
here?
time, yeah.
Okay, I was just trying to keep as impartial as possible, as I am, keep it
And you're
informative.
wearing green, you know.
And I realized as I picked up my mug, it's also green. So I promise that's not subliminal in the slightest. I just look good in green. Like that's all it is. Green's my color,
Okay.
like in terms of cosmetic. So I'm just sharing here some articles, both offer both sides in terms of one being quite labor dominant and then the banker.com one being more criticizing of labor and their like AML policies. But let's swing into business as usual. I certainly felt like a little bit like a news reporter there, if I'm going to be honest with you. Okay, first question. Do I need to keep copies of my clients' passports and driving licenses on my system after I've carried out my checks? I'd rather just delete them for security purposes.
Yeah, I mean, I can understand you're thinking of the data protection rules and so on, and thinking, right, I shouldn't be holding personal data that I don't need, and I shouldn't be holding it longer than I have to hold it. But unfortunately, under the money laundering regs, yes, you do need to keep copies of the ID documents that you've seen. And your supervisor may ask you for copies or may ask to see copies and may even criticize you if you haven't got copies. I've seen that in supervisors' reports, went to see Bloggins accountants and they no longer had copies of their clients' passports because they lost them or they deleted the data or they whatever. So unfortunately, yes, you do need to keep them. So the answer has to be you need to keep them securely so that they are not poached, hacked or whatever by somebody else. And that brings you generally into the whole area of IT security and not clicking links in dodgy emails and things like that.
Yeah. Within Firmcheck, just as an example of if this is something that you're concerned about in terms of a breach of data, and this should be for most software providers in other areas of your business as well, there's user access settings that you can apply, but there's also 2FA that you're able to enable within Firmcheck, which is that god awful annoying code generator where you have to go into your phone, find the code, put the code in.
We've got 30 seconds. Oh god, it's going to expire. Oh, got to do it again now.
It sounded terrible then, but it sets me into a rage. I'm like, but it's there as that extra level of security. So within Firmcheck, that is available there. It should be something in your firm policy that you direct that when that 2FA option is there, that you mandate anybody that has access to that software that they have to enable 2FA. On our Firmcheck internal policy side, like me as a staff member, it's the same. We use a password, like a one password where everything has to be kept and secured rather than, Google passwords are not secure. Do not use them. Use or one vault or something like that. But no, I'm right. Am I right in saying that you have to keep your client documentation for 5 years?
You have to keep it for 5 years after the end of the client relationship.
Yeah.
So you might be keeping it for a lot longer than 5 years. Because if you have the same client for 20 years, then you're going to keep that data for 20 years and so on. Did you just explain what 2FA was?
A little bit. I actually find it really interesting. Is multi-factor authentication. I can't say some words properly, but it's just basically a random generated code that's unique to you and unique to your login. I think I saw somewhere, I think it was in cloud.
Is that sent to you like your mobile phone? Is that?
Yes,
so,
as part of you.
Is that a different device? So
yes.
you're like, yeah.
Yeah. So anyone that's kind of hacker remote, they don't also have access to your phone. So you set it up as you set up your account, basically, and you scan a QR code and it's unique to your login. But I saw something. This is not related to AML, but I think it was at Cloudflare with their multi-factor code generation. They actually have a wall of lava lamps. And they have a camera facing that lava lamp wall, and all the intricate uniqueness of each little lava blob is like a data point that is uniquely generated for that code. So they use that, ever evolving, changing image to generate the code. And I think it's in the front of their offices, so people can walk past this lava lamp wall in front of the camera, and then their image is then kind of used as data points. I'm not a tech person, but I thought that was really cool and crazy.
I thought lava lamps sort of went out in the 1980s, but
if you find one, let me know. I really want one. But I'm in a rental property, so I feel like they're a bit of a fire risk. Cool, fantastic. So yes, you need to keep the ID. You need to keep it for up to 5 years after the relationship's concluded. So that's including while you have the relationship with that client. If you're worried about breach of data, look into more secure ways of keeping that data. But it is a requirement that you keep that identification.
Okay, and just very quickly, why you need to keep it for 5 years after? Because the police can come along literally years after the event and say, oh, we're inquiring about this fraud that allegedly happened in 2021. Your client was involved. Did you have ID for him? Well, if he's left in 2022 and you've deleted the ID, you don't know. So you have to keep it for 5 years.
It also gives you a little gold star with your accounting or supervisory body, like in terms of good documentation process. If they walk in and you go, I've got all my documentation for 5 years, they'll be like, oh, you just want to, it's like making them a cup of tea when they sit down sort of thing. Like, you want to start off on the right foot. Okay, cool.
Custard creams, that sort of thing. Give them some biscuits.
Yeah, totally.
Maybe creams aren't a thing in New Zealand.
Sorry, my questions are all mucky. I tried to do it a new way of doing it today, but it's gone bonkers. So I read from somewhere else. It says, what are the fines for non-compliance?
Right.
From 0 to £100,000.
Well, that's literally true. Yeah. It depends on your supervisory body, because what we're talking about really is technically penalties rather than fines, to use the correct terminology, because I am thinking about the penalties that might be levied on you by your supervisory body or by HMRC if they are your supervisory body, rather than what might happen in the Crown Court if you are convicted of a criminal offence in court proceedings. So the professional bodies tend to have committees and things like that who will listen to your circumstances, adjudicate on your case, and come up with a penalty figure. And I was looking at a case recently, which is, I think it's okay to say, the case is going before the ACCA. And they have assembled, very correctly, a bundle of documents for the tribunal to look at. And it's 800 pages of documents on this one case for somebody who's accused of not having complied with the money laundering regs. because it's got in there every email that he's ever sent and every reply that's ever come, and him saying, yeah, well, I haven't got around to it yet, but I'll get to it in the next fortnight, and then it not happening, and that, you know, so pages and pages of stuff. And that in itself is a huge, if you like, penalty, a hugely stressful thing if you are being investigated by your professional body, because this goes on for months. And, you know, it's just something that you don't need in your life. You know, you really don't need the anxiety involved in being investigated by your professional body for failure to complete the money laundering checks. And just think how much easier life would have been if only you'd taken on Firmcheck sooner. But yeah, okay. So the question, how much?
Yeah, how much?
And then the answer is generally a few thousand quid. And also very often costs as well, and they can be more than the penalty. But frankly, by the time you get to the end of that process, after many months, and somebody says to you, right, you've got to pay us X, you're thinking, thank goodness that is over with. You know, pay them, take the money, and just leave me alone.
It's gone away.
HMRC have a different system.
Yeah.
And they are rigorously fair, which also means they are rigorously inflexible, because they treat everybody the same way. And so in terms of late registration penalties, I did a blog article on this recently on the website www.mlrosupport.co.uk. I did a blog article on this, and step one in this calculation, there are 8 steps to the calculation of penalty. Step one is how many periods of 3 months is the registration late? And then you work out £5,000 penalty for each 3 months. So if somebody is like 3 years late registering, then step one, the penalty is that's 3 years is 12 periods of 3 months. So 12 times £5,000. So that's £60,000 as your starting point of the penalty. And then you look at the size of the business, and you reduce the penalty if the business's turnover is less than, I think it's £100,000 a year. And so on and so on and so on. When I say turnover, I shouldn't have said turnover. I should have said gross profit. So there's this multi-step computation, which produces a final penalty figure. One of the things that is important in that computation is there is a very big reduction for unprompted disclosure. In other words, you have contacted HMRC saying, oops, I should have been registered, but I've not, but I'm doing it now. And another big reduction is for paying the penalty within 30 days of being told what the final figure is. So in those ways, you can reduce the penalty very significantly. But yeah, so HMRC penalties can be big. Again, it depends on the gross profit of the business, but it can be big. I was talking to somebody and they said, oh, we've got a penalty of £52,000, but we've managed to halve it to 26,000, and we're happy with that. Now, I wouldn't be happy paying out 26,000, but hey, so yeah. Having said all of that, I don't want to frighten people. My thing is, look, we can fix your AML compliance, and I don't want to go around saying, "Whoa, penalties!" You know, yeah. So,
I think a good way to understand it, because maybe the impression behind this question may be, or maybe one of the views that could be in terms of asking how much fines are, is it worth actually bothering with AML compliance if the fine is going to be less than what it's going to cost me to be AML compliant? Maybe that's part of it. Or maybe, you know, you're sitting there and you know it's not great and you're like, oh, how much could I be exposed to? And I think the cost of being compliant will never be more, would be unlikely to be more than the cost of a fine that you would get, in terms of if you roll it with, if you get in that sticky situation of contacting David and then working alongside with David, as well as, the time that you're going to have to dedicate 24/7 for a week to fix it, the reputational damage that you'll have with your accounting body as well. So the cost of compliance will, not be more than that, would you say?
Yeah, and also I'd like to stress, if that's the right word, the anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
Talking to accountants who are subject to investigation, it's horrible.
Mm-hmm.
They are just so churned up about it, and because it brings into question their integrity and their professionalism, and those are sort of things they live by. And all of a sudden they're being challenged and told, well, you aren't being professional, you aren't doing it properly, you aren't doing it like an accountant member of a professional body is supposed to do stuff, and that really hurts. So yeah, it's a non-financial aspect, but people get very upset about the whole process.
I think twisting the narrative too, so I am going off a little bit off topic, so I hope that's okay with everybody, but it's also about twisting the narrative in terms of when you're getting those documents from your client, rather than going, oh, it's a pain in the butt, like I have to get your driver's license, I have to get your proof of address, I have to know about your business. Flip it and make the sell that it's you trying to better understand that client's profile, business dealings, so that you're able to better serve that client. Because if you just go, oh, I need your documentation for AML, they'll be like, what's AML? I'm not giving you my driver's license. What? Whereas if you go, I'm just trying to figure out a way to understand your service, the services I can offer you better, I can be better poised to understand that, then, if you're just changing the narrative a little bit. So
and funnily enough, people say to me, look, I know my clients really well. I understand their businesses. I would know if something was wrong.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, yeah, the phrase you just used, know your client, is what we use all the time in terms of money laundering. We talk about KYC. And it's about knowing your clients, so that if something is weird and unusual that happens, you think, whoa, that's weird and unusual, because I know what usually happens with this client, and this is not it. And that's what KYC is. But the point is that you need some documentation to show that you have that knowledge and that understanding.
Yeah, totally. Okay, we've evolved past the cost of compliance, but there was recently was it HMRC or the government submitted a cost of compliance survey? They were trying to understand what actually the AML regulations imposed on accounting firms are actually costing the firm. So
yes, and for a lot of smaller practitioners, they were saying, well, the question is, how much money have I spent? And the point is not the money that I've spent, it's the time that I've spent.
Yeah.
And okay, the cost of that on one basis is zero. But it isn't really zero, because it's taking up my time, and I would rather be helping my clients to achieve X, Y, Z.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's £6 annually per client if you use Firmcheck. Okay. What are the key bits of legislation to quote in letters of engagement? I'm assuming that this is in relation to AML compliance.
Okay. I'm a member of ICAEW, and I thought recently, a few months ago, I thought, all right, I'll do an engagement letter for somebody. What I'll do is I'll just copy the ICAEW template and wang that across. And I copied all the bits of the ICAEW template because I'm, thorough and all that sort of thing. I think it came to about 120 pages.
Oh, God.
And I'm like, there is no way I am sending a client a 120-page engagement letter What can I do? And chopped it down, and I got it down to about 10 pages of normal size time. But one of the things, again, I'm going to say, go back to your supervisory body to see what you have to impose, and yeah, have a look at the template. And one of the things that is often forgotten is that under some regulations whose name I can't remember, you have to disclose to a client who your professional indemnity insurer is. You don't disclose how much the cover is, but you say something like, my professional indemnity insurers are ABC Limited, the cover is worldwide, excluding Canada and the United States of America. Full stop. And you don't say, I have cover for £1 million or £2 million or whatever, because that's an invitation, isn't it? You know, hit me with a claim for £2 million because I've got insurance. But you are supposed to mention who your insurers are. Now, I don't know what you do if you change your insurer, because does that mean you have to send out everybody a new engagement letter? That would be a real pain in the posterior, wouldn't it? And when I say the insurer, it's not the broker, it's the actual insurance company. And sometimes you might say it's, you know, well, I've got about 5 different insurance companies contribute because there's an arrangement amongst insurers, which again is a heck of a pain. But yeah, so insurer is one of the things. Another thing which is I see quite often is that your headed note paper should have on it, if you're a limited company, the company full name somewhere, the company registered number, the company registered country, which is usually England or Scotland or whatever, and the registered office address somewhere. Now, that's supposed to be on your company headed note paper. It's supposed to be on your website. It's supposed to be on your emails somewhere in the footer in the small print. Now, the number of times that I see accountancy firms that don't have that is staggering. One guy I was talking to, he actually runs 3 different accountancy firms for all sorts of reasons from the same address. And there, you know, he writes out letters from Bloggins Accountants, and I said, well, you know, is this Bloggins Accountants London Limited or Bloggins Accountants Birmingham Limited or Bloggins Accountants Manchester? Which of your companies is this actually? And he's like, well, I don't really know. Well, if you don't really know, how is the client supposed to know? And the purpose of this, I suppose, purpose of all of these things is that if the client decides to sue you, then they really have to know who it is that's suing, who they're contracting with, who they're suing, and who the insurers might be. So yeah, I'm full of all the cheerful stuff, aren't I? You know, if your client sues you, this will happen. If your supervisory body comes after you, you'll have tons of stress. Sorry, I'm just not cheerful.
No, look,
it's the grey tie, isn't it? You know,
I hope I often get laughed at for my Kiwi accent, so I hope the Kiwi accent gets a little bit of a lighthearted laugh in the background, just to bring up the tone a little bit. But I suppose just to bring it back around in terms of the key bits of legislation and letters of engagement, there is
tons of it, unfortunately.
Yeah. If I'm to use, say, AML software or an AML process, say, Firmcheck, Smart Search, Credit Safe, whatever, do I have to disclose that in my letters of engagement that as part of my AML, I use the software provider, and that's all you say? Do you need to include that?
Whether you need to, I'm not sure. I think I probably would. I would say to the client, look, as part of onboarding, we have to do various things. We're going to do an electronic check with Smart Search or Verify or however it happens to be. Are you okay with that? And perhaps phrase it as, I'll assume you are okay with that unless you come back and tell me that you're not.
Yeah.
But it's not a credit check. it is an ID check, and there are differences.
Yeah.
But yeah.
I'm just going to remind the audience, if you do have any questions as they come up, you are encouraged to pop them in the chat. That's what this is all is. That's what this all is about. Or any comments on anything that we've already talked about, or any additional questions. We have another question, in that checking for PAP, which we interpreted as checking for a PEP because A&E are close on the keyboard. But if the person that submitted this question's online, please confirm if it was PAP or PEP. But checking for PEP, question mark.
Yeah, that was an interesting case, actually. Horrifying case, as usual, involving lawyers, not accountants, involving lawyers, where the lawyer did some conveyancing for an Iranian family, and they were buying some properties in London for, I think it was £37 million, as you do.
Yeah.
And he didn't treat them as politically exposed persons, which is PEPs. And it turned out that somebody was the sister of somebody who was a PEP, and therefore, because of the definition of PEP to include close family members, he should have treated them as PEPs. And he got hammered by his professional body, the Solicitors Regulation Authority, for not treating them as PEPs. And what had happened was that he'd done an electronic check, and the firm that provided the check had not picked up that this person was the sister of whoever. And so he did the check came back, they're not PEPs. So he didn't treat them as PEPs, and it turned out they were, and he should have done. And as you know, if somebody's a PEP, then you have various additional procedures to go through. So he got blasted by his AML supervisor, and it went to a tribunal, and the tribunal said, no, we think he's okay. He did everything. He relied on an electronic provider who was reliable, but actually in this case had it wrong. So no criticism of him, no penalty. And the Solicitors Regulation Authority were absolutely livid. So they took it to the High Court for a judge to tell the tribunal that they'd done it wrong. Unfortunately for the SRA, the judge told the SRA that they were wrong, and that actually no blame attached to this person and no penalty applied. So how do you know somebody's a PEP? You do an electronic check. If you're not doing electronic checks, then what you can do is you can ask the person, are you a PEP? But obviously there's a risk that, if the person happens to be Rishi Sunak's cousin or something, and they don't tell you, you're not going to pick it up, are you? Similarly, I had somebody ask me, right, I act for somebody who's a local councillor. Is he a PEP? And if you look at the definition of PEPs, they are basically people with roles in national organisations. So members of parliament, certainly. Local councillors, nah, I wouldn't say so.
Yeah. Just a footnote, if you are asking someone in person or over in Zoom call or whatever, whether or not they're a PEP, you need to have that recorded in some way. Like, you can't just rely on being able to tell your accounting body or whomever, oh, well, I asked.
I would have asked them. I'm sure I would have
asked them. It's all good.
Yeah.
Just trust me. You need to have that documented. And that's why, like, ID software is good, because it does document it in that way. But if you don't require that or don't want to pay for that, then if you're asking them, you do need to make sure. Maybe you also have a contingency of Googling them, like adding a media check on that, seeing if they come up there, but probably not. Also with PEPs, actually, I did onboarding for a firm. And as I was doing it, I was running PEPs just as part of onboarding. I don't do this day to day. But within Firmcheck, there's a people and sanctions check. It's free as part of your subscription. So I was just running them and then ran it, and it came back as a positive for a PEP that this individual was. And I was like, oh my God, he's a PEP. Oh, he's also from Russia. So he's a Russian politically exposed person. This is like the worst thing ever. Like, what do I do? Just an event manager.
Delete button quick, Sophie.
Yeah,
Yes.
I've got a big red button that's like, shut it down. But what had actually happened is that he wasn't, bless him, but he had a similar name, and it did within that flag go, it's flagged on this person, but it could also be this person, this person, this person, because they had a similar name, first name and last name reversed. So sometimes you can get a false positive, and when you do, it just warrants a little bit more of an investigation. Fantastic.
Yeah.
Great.
Did we answer the question about how many directors do you have to do ID on and how many trustees do you have to do ID on?
No, that's our last question for today. So it says, in a limited company, if there are 3 or more directors appointed, how many directors do you do ID checks on? And then I'll ask the second part after. But how many directors?
So as I mentioned previously, Regulation 28.3b2 says that you have to verify and get the full names of all the directors. But for me, that doesn't involve doing ID checks on all the directors. Obviously, those directors who are also clients for self-assessment tax returns, you've got to ID them because they're clients. But if you've got directors who are not clients, then you have to check the full name. Now, how do you do that? Well, you could ask the company, can you give us a list of the full names of your directors? You can do a search at Companies House and see if that gives you the same list. I think I might be tempted to stop there. But somebody from one of the supervisory bodies will probably come along and say, no, you've got to do something else, because it does actually use the word verify. But without doing the full ID check, how do you verify? I mean, you can verify by saying, let's get a sight of your passport or your driving license. I suppose the good thing is it doesn't say do a risk assessment on, because you don't have to do a risk assessment on a director who's not a client. But in terms of belt and braces, have I verified? Then you would ask for some documents from them.
Yeah. And as Angie and Suzanne have just said, so ICAEW says all, ICB says all. Something I actually wanted to discuss today, but we are running out of time, is that if there is differing advising on how you should tackle AML, so some say that you should do one director, or some say that you should do all. It's actually all correct. Isn't that? There's actually no wrong answer, but the answer is refer to your accounting body's guidance on it.
Yeah.
OPBAS oversee accounting bodies and their AML compliance processes. So OPBAS is that's correct. OPBAS,
yes,
has said that is adequate. It is adequate to do all, or it's adequate to do some. But that's where that inconsistency comes from. I used to think accounting bodies were just having a laugh and just making up random rules for the fun of it, of what their view is, but they're actually being reviewed to say that is compliant. So that's where some confusion sits.
It is. I mean, that is one of the difficult areas, because the regulations do say you've got to verify the full names of all the directors.
Yeah.
And the same with trustees of a charity, whereas some of the professional bodies would say, right, do the top guy, do the finance guy, do the person that you deal with ordinarily, and stop there. It is a bit of a difficult one. It's kind of there's no one right answer other than, as you say, speak to your supervisory body.
Yeah, your supervisory body. And then the second part, in the charity, how many trustees should we perform ID checks on?
It is the same. I would certainly want to do the treasurer.
Okay, as a minimum.
And the chairman or whatever, the chief executive or whatever. And yeah, if there's like a financial controller or somebody like that, I would do that. One thing which we haven't mentioned, which we should mention in that context, is PSCs, persons of significant control.
Yes.
Because again, there is this obligation to keep an eye on the register of PSCs and to make sure that it is correct and that it fits with what you know. And according to the regulations, if it's not correct, and if it's a company, you report that to Companies House. Bound to say, I think that's daft. Yeah, you can edit this bit out, can't you? I think that's daft if it's your client, because you can just go to the client and say, hey, your PSC information isn't correct. Sort it out. Let's make it correct, and then we don't have to do a report. Similarly, what I see all the time is the ICO, Information Commissioner's Office. Everybody's registered with the ICO. How often are the registration details out of date? You know, people have moved offices or something like that, and they've got an old address in the ICO register. So worth just takes about 5 seconds to search the ICO register for your name. Just check, see if it's up to date, and if it's not up to date, put it right. You know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Get it correct.
Yes, but I do agree. Some of the professional bodies do say you've got to do everybody.
Yeah. Yeah. I was joking with David before. I said I need to get him a mug that says refer to your accounting body or your supervisory body, because sometimes that is the answer, unfortunately. And because there are so many different regulations, it's just best to do what they say and what they ask. So I'm just going to chuck up David's LinkedIn here. He often posts Firmcheck stuff, but other than that, and the work that we do together, but also, you know, it's another resource to help keep you up to date and informed. Also, where David is in the world too. We haven't got the Accountex North speaker schedule out yet, do we? You don't know what we're talking about yet?
No. And one topic which we thought we might get to, and we're not going to get to today, but maybe we'll get to next month, is well, 2 topics. One is, what are we going to do next month? I don't know whether you want to say anything about that.
I will.
But other than that, the review of compliance or non-compliance that the supervisory bodies did.
Generally compliant.
The generally compliant and the non-compliant and the so on. But we will come to that as to what the supervisory bodies are finding in terms of compliance and non-compliance.
Yeah, at the moment I'm trying to twist some arms to understand what that means for each accounting body. So once you laugh because you're like, good luck. But once I get that, I'll be able to share that. It's generally compliant or not compliant. So how is that defined? But
what I would say very quickly is in terms of there are like 3 grades. It's compliant, generally compliant, not compliant. Now, one of the bodies, the ICB, apparently only uses 2 of those 3. You're either compliant or you're not compliant. There's no generally compliant with the ICB, which is a bit harsh, but there you go.
ICB uses generally compliant.
I'm told
they took it away, but they only recently put it back.
Ah, right. Okay, fine.
It's HMRC actually as well.
Yeah.
Who you're either compliant or you're not. There's no grey space there, which is interesting. But what I'm sharing here now, we won't be meeting here next month. We'll be meeting at summer school. We'll be holding an AMA session, the AMA session within the summer school, Firmcheck Summer School. Firmcheck Summer School is a 5-week webinar schedule of evolving topics on AML, and we will meet every Tuesday for 5 weeks. Heaps of guests, ACCA, IAB, ICB, expert, heat and fences, lots of talks. But something I'm really proud for, and that's draining my life source at the moment, is accompanying summer school. There'll be 20 new free education courses from Firmcheck on AML topics. So it's free to register. You can register for some of the days, all the days, none of the days. But if you register, you get a recording after. So I hope to see you guys there. But yeah, no AMA next month. It's the AMA's in summer school.
Yeah, lovely. Okay, see you next month in summer school.
See you at summer school, David. Thank you for today. And I hope to see you all there. Awesome. Okay, bye.
For now.